Ambassador Moni Chadda. He used to be the representative of India at the UN here and spent many years in New York. Also worked at the UN. And then we have Ambassador Hardeep Singh Puri, who's also India's representative to the UN and was in New York and served in many other posts in the Indian Foreign Service. I'll have each of them just sort of describe the book, maybe read a little bit from their book for a few minutes, so you get some sense of what they've written and what's on their minds.
This book is not about diplomacy. This book of mine is what happens to you while you're in the throes of diplomacy, when you're conducting diplomacy. What strikes you when you're 3 years in a place or 6 years in a place, and what you see when you look around. And so that is the kind of thing that's reflected. For example, we're just talking about this outside. What did New York look like in 1968 when I came here? All the kiosks were manned by Jewish people. All the taxi drivers were Jewish. And when I say all, I mean 90+%. Couldn't think of it. This was a sea change took place in the 1980s when I was here, my second avatar, roughly in 1985, when you found suddenly, almost overnight, well, not overnight, in the course of a year, all the Jewish taxi drivers and all the Jewish kiosk minders suddenly went out. Well, they had climbed up the ladder, they'd gone to better opportunities. This is a land of opportunity. And then the Indians came in, the Gujaratis monopolized the kiosk trade, and the Sardars mostly the taxi trade. Now, this is not the important thrust of my book, but I'm just pointing out to you some of the trivia, which I think are worth keeping in mind as we go along in this beautiful country. In 1971, which is the year I left, was the year that Bangladesh was created. I left in March 71, and then after that I was at the UN division in Delhi, where we went about canvassing for Bangladesh, which was created finally in December 71, after the war. And I remember at that time going to a few countries with a senior minister called Gokhale, very, very nice gentleman. Went to 7 countries, meeting with Kaunda, meeting with Nyerere, meeting with other people, meeting Siad Barre of Somalia. Siad Barre was the one who sniggered, as we discussed. I mean, he couldn't care less about Bangladesh, about his fellow Muslims out there. And then, yes, of course, meeting Haile Selassie. The two of us went there. Suddenly, when we found, we met him. And yes, we got his minister, the Ethiopian patriarch, the patriarch of the Coptic Church. We had a meeting with him. And he gave us, it's up to you to how to interpret his support for Bangladesh. As we left, he said, Your Excellency, rest assured, I shall pray for you. But the truth is, we needed prayers. We didn't have support from anywhere.
Disasters are of two kinds. One, natural disasters, and then there are man-made or policy-induced disasters. This book is about the second kind. This book tries to trace the genesis of flawed policies, flawed decision-making that resulted in the rise of hydra-headed monsters like ISIS. It is about the use of force, the arming of rebels, and the unraveling of countries. It is about perilous interventions. The book does not take the position that all interventions are perilous. I will just go through very quickly the situation which prevailed in Libya. Gaddafi was widely acknowledged by everyone to be a madman. He was widely held responsible for the downing of Pan American flight over Lockerbie. When the Security Council started looking at reports of violence in Libya, there was not a single member out of those 15, not a single country out of the 15, including India, which wanted to hold a brief for what Gaddafi was doing. Therefore, clearly the council needed to act. But the problem was that some members of the council, particularly those which still felt a feeling of guilt about the inaction in Rwanda and Srebrenica. In Rwanda, 800,000 people were killed, in spite of the fact that the Security Council and the UN knew that a massacre was going to take place, and yet we did nothing. So the doctrine of humanitarian response, or the doctrine of responsibility to protect, was born out of the anguished introspection of the international community following Rwanda and Srebrenica. So clearly the council needed to do something in the case of Libya. So when Gaddafi said, "I will hunt you out like rats," well, those who wanted intervention said he is going to massacre the civilian population. Gaddafi kept protesting that no, what I'm saying are the people who are attacking me. These are jihadists. In a very famous last phone call with Prime Minister Blair, he said, "You are not understanding the nature of the threat. These are jihadists. They will come to haunt you and you are taking their side." But the council passed resolution 1970 and 73, which authorized the use of force. In retrospect, I keep saying that the council resolution was not a bad one. The council resolution had other redeeming features: ceasefire, political process. But as things always happen, once you had the authorization for the use of force, you went ahead and used it, bombed the hell out of the place, and you didn't stop when you could have. All that needed to be done in the case of Libya was for a cordon, physical cordon sanitaire to be produced around Benghazi. That was all that was required. And then, having found that the authorization was misused in Libya, when it came to Syria, then the Chinese and the Russians exercised double vetoes. With great pride, I say in this book that the only unanimous statement in the case of Syria is the Indian presidential statement in the Security Council in August 2011 when I was presiding, which had three simple elements: ceasefire, both sides to the conflict walking back, an all-inclusive Syrian peace process, and then ultimately the Syrian people to decide who will lead them. This is a serious, in some respects, a disturbing book, because it traces the genesis of flawed policies which went wrong decisions which were taken, which resulted in the growth of hydra-headed monsters like ISIS. It deals with the issue of use of force, the arming of rebels, and their disastrous consequences. I have written because I think public opinion is a strong instrument, and public opinion should be made aware of these perilous interventions. I define a perilous intervention as a whimsical, reflexive decision which does not think through the consequences. And unless we learn from the mistakes of the past, we are going to end up recommitting those same mistakes all over again.
We've had an amazing 3 days, and you name the topic and the genre, it has been covered in our 3 days at this literary festival, our third annual literary festival. From poetry to politics to mathematics, we've covered it. Both in India and the US, politics are front and center, in our faces, everywhere. We can't get away from it. So even though we're an arts council, even the arts reflect it. I mean, I don't know whether many of you noticed, but this year our literary festival was dominated by subjects of politics, irrespective where: turmoil, politics, corruption, all sorts of things, fault lines, Kashmir. Today you're going to listen to U.S. Attorney of the Southern District, Preet Bharara, speak to you about politics and corruption. He will be engaged in conversation by Seema Modi, CNBC correspondent.
Thank you to Seema for agreeing to ask questions. Usually, I'm the one who asks the questions, and that's what I prefer.
Tables turned.
Yeah, I know. It's good to be with this group of esteemed folks and literary members of the limelight. I think there are people here who have literally written more books than I have read, so I'm a little I'm a little humbled to be in this group.
My grandfather used to always say that you can't be a politician in India without being a little corrupt. You just can't get out there without a clean slate. Could you apply that to leaders here in New York as well?
No, I actually think that there are a lot of, I get in trouble for, because when I speak in forums like this and in speeches, I say a lot of bad things about corruption, and I say a lot because I think it's deserved. And I say a lot of things about Albany, and I don't mean to cast all of them with that bad phraseology. They're good politicians. They're good public servants. I worked for a time. I don't know if it was mentioned in the introduction or not. I worked in the United States Senate for 4.5 years for the senior senator from New York. So it's not like some people in Albany have criticized me and my office for being people who don't understand politics, or people who don't understand how government works, or people who just hate the legislative branch. That's obviously not true. I spent 4.5 years. I moved my whole family to Washington and worked in the U.S. Senate and worked as chief counsel of a subcommittee. And one of the things we did was we engaged in oversight of the executive branch. So I know and respect people in politics. I know and respect people who have given up a lot of other money that they might be able to earn in the private sector by engaging in public service. It's not for me, but other people have done it, and I think there's a lot of good folks. So I don't think it's the case you have to be a little bit corrupt. You may have to be a little bit crazy to go into politics, I think, these days. But I think there are a lot of good folks. And the more and more we get good folks to come into politics, the better we'll all be.
On the state level, do you think there is wrongdoing that hasn't been uncovered yet?
Yes. And if you guys have names and numbers, give them to me, please. It's like anything else. Prosecutors, one of the reasons I come and talk about these kinds of issues, whether we're talking about corruption on Wall Street or corruption in the state legislature or in the executive branch for that matter, is no prosecutor can get every bad guy, and we rely on the cases that we bring to send a message to other folks and to deter other people, right? So the multiplier effect of having one case against one bad person had a father. You are, how loud your father is, none of that matters to us, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've had a lot of success cracking down on corruption on Wall Street to a point where now the mere hint of an investigation from you or your team can be damaging to a company or an individual's reputation. When you conduct these investigations or raids, do you think about the unintended consequences?
Yeah, we think about the collateral consequences all the time. And in the same way that when a firefighter gets word that there's smoke coming out of a home and you have to go check it out, we're sort of the same way. When there's smoke, it's our obligation to investigate. In the same way that a firefighter needs to take care not to do undue damage to the building, you may have to break a window or break through the door. And most of the time, because they're expert and they're professionals, when there's a certain kind of smoke that they see emanating from a home, not coming out of the chimney, there's a fire. And they're saving people's lives when they go in there. Not only saving the lives of the people in that residence, but the lives of the people in the houses neighboring that residence as well. Now, sometimes it turns out it wasn't a fire, and the door has been broken and windows have been broken, but that does not relieve the responsibility of the firefighter or the sheriff or the cop or whatever from doing their job. Now, you need to do it with great sensitivity, and you need to understand that investigation can cause collateral consequences to a company, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we need to shrink from our responsibility and hide under a desk and never engage in any investigation at all because no one's above the law. Because if that was true, then that would be a shield against all manner of investigation. I don't believe that would be an appropriate balance.
But is there a discussion around how to ensure one has sufficient evidence available before, or sufficient evidence to warrant an investigation or raid?
Yeah, we're always taking into account, and probably in the political sphere even more, taking into account what it means to investigate a person or an institution and what it means if it got out, which is why we try to do everything in secret. That's why the grand jury is secret. That's why it's a federal crime to leak anything that happens in a grand jury. That's why sometimes we don't take certain steps until it otherwise becomes public, because we don't want people to know what we're doing. A, because we want evidence to be destroyed. B, we don't want people to flee. But C, also, further to your question, we don't want to engage in something that's going to cause reputational damage if there may not ultimately be a crime committed. Now, sometimes, as you know, in the financial area, then everybody knows something happened, and people very quickly find out there's an investigation going on, and very often there are no charges that arise from that. Our job is to be sensitive as much as possible, consistent with doing our job and holding everyone accountable to the rule of law. But your responsibility is to be that much more beyond reproach. And if your industry is such, or your company is such, that's so fragile that the mere opening of an investigation or issuing of a subpoena is going to cause your business to collapse, maybe there's a problem with your business model, and maybe there's a problem with your reputation generally, because we are often opening up investigations into business enterprises, and they don't collapse, even after charges are brought against individuals and sometimes against the company itself. So there is some responsibility on the part of those institutions who complain about our investigations. What is it about your institution that the mere hint of an investigation causes everyone to flee?
Your work on Wall Street, taking down some of these hedge funds, has garnered a lot of attention, not just from those in the financial industry, but the entertainment world as well. Billions, Showtime, widely based off of your work that you've done. How does that feel?
Has anyone here seen Billions? So for those of you who haven't seen it, it's a series on Showtime, and it stars as the United States Attorney Paul Giamatti, who's a great actor, with whom I had dinner when he was preparing for the role. And I will just tell you, it's a highly fictionalized.
Why don't you explain that?
Highly fictionalized view of the United States Attorney. So when they said they were doing the show, people thought that was kind of cool, because most of the time when you see shows about prosecutors, it's about the district attorney. And I'm not the district attorney, I'm the United States Attorney, and that's different. So I met with Paul, I met with the producers, we talked about The Office a bit. It sounded like it was going to be, a certain kind of show. My parents were excited about it. My conservative Indian parents were excited about it. So presumably everybody was tuned to the first episode of Billions, and if those of you who have seen it know what I'm about to say, and those of you who haven't will, and you will censor this as appropriate, the cameras. The opening scene of the show has the United States Attorney, played by Paul Giamatti, not wearing any clothes, lying on the ground, his hands bound, engaging in an act of sadomasochism with a woman with high-heeled shoes. All I know is my parents never mentioned the show again. They didn't ask me, Breathe, what do you think? Nothing. Again, it's as if the show doesn't exist. So
not an accurate
highly
depiction.
fictionalized.
The entertainment part of taking your work and putting it on Showtime, kind of a cool feeling? Something you'd like to explore
Well, it was
more?
until that first scene.
I think we're going to wrap up our discussion here. Preethinder, excuse me. This was a fascinating, informative discussion, and your insight is appreciated. So thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
I really
Thanks,
appreciate it.